Kia ora, everyone, and welcome to this fireside chat with Abley. Our topic is tech, climate and transport, the boom zone, and we'll come on to that in a little bit as to why. It's become more and more important that we understand these relationships between tech, climate and transport, particularly with the recent release of the emissions reduction plan, in which transport forms quite a large topic within that plan. So we call this a fireside chat, largely because we want to have a nice, comfortable vibe and not be too techy. So this means we're not really going to get into huge technical areas. What we really want to do is explain the development of CarbonWise, which we'll come on to, from a human perspective. So with that in mind, let's start meeting the team. So I'll let Benjamin introduce himself first.
Hi everyone, I'm Benjamin. I'm a transport planner by background. Worked in the UK for a few years, helping organisations reduce their commuting emissions by implementing various measures. And I came to Abley to focus on sustainability and measuring those emissions better. And so I've been involved with the development of CarbonWise from the beginning, and it's been a really exciting journey.
Hey, thanks, Benjamin. Emma.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Just checking. Cool. So I'm Emma and I'm the UX designer at Abley. My role is generally just to ask the simple and obvious questions up front. And I'm really into the human-centered design, and I think asking the simple questions up front and getting back to basics is really important, not only with this project, but just working in a company where there's lots of highly technical and intelligent, passionate people. So I sort of bring it back down to the basics and distill things.
Cool, excellent. Stacy.
Yep, my name's Stacy. I was originally a mechanical engineer, but recently got more into spatial development and software. So, doing things to help kids travel to school safely and, share that information, make it accessible and visualizations.
Excellent, cool. Thanks, Stacey. I'll introduce myself. So my name's Chris Morris, and I manage the new business and marketing team at Abley. But for most of my career, I've spent it looking at and working with location technology. So that's kind of my background. I guess the final member of the team that we should introduce actually is Abley, the company we all work for. So Abley, for those who don't know, is it's a Kiwi-based firm. We specialise in transport and location technology professional services work, and we've got a vast experience in road safety and work with clients from Waka Kotahi, the Ministry of Transport, to name a couple. And our work is really focused on reducing death and serious injury on our roads. We really do this by combining our expertise in transport and our expertise in location technology to create solutions for our clients. In addition, we have a team, our People, Places, Planet team, who look after or look at issues of micromobility in transport, the impact of sustainability, and really this is where the seed of CarbonWise has originated from. Before we get onto that, I'd just like to give a shout out to Techweek. It is brilliant to be part of this event. There are so many really good speakers and so many really good events going on throughout the week, and being part of it is really important to Abley, acting as we do within the wider community. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about CarbonWise, Benjamin. Where did it come from? How did we come up with the idea?
Yeah, so CarbonWise is now a tool, a software tool that's allowing organizations to measure commuting emissions, employee commuting. But it started from a few years ago. Our Abley Christchurch team moved offices to the other side of town, and with it came a lot of changes to people's commutes, of course. And so being a tech company, we decided to build a solution to provide employees with information on what their transport options were to get to and from work. So we automated providing personalized information on people's commutes based on their home address and their work address. And so we developed that in-house and used it internally, still use it to this day. And then we started talking to other businesses, thinking, well, if it's useful to us, maybe it's going to be useful to other organizations. So we started engaging with the wider industry from that point.
And I remember going kind of through this process, and we would take CarbonWise to different clients. I think we were quite successful with schools in particular, but something wasn't quite right. Something was missing. Benjamin, what was that?
Yeah, so what we didn't realize was that organizations were not necessarily just interested in knowing about how people travel. What we were missing in this picture was the sustainability element. So that's where the boom zone comes in, connecting transport and tech with the climate. And we didn't realize that actually lots of organizations have requirements to report on their emissions. And that was the real driver to wanting to obtain that data on commuting.
Yeah, so I remember it was really interesting at the time, trying to push TravelWise, hearing that actually it was all about carbon, and I think for us in the development of CarbonWise, this was perhaps our first major pivot. We turned away from just how you got to work, but actually started calculating what those emissions were when you know how you travel to work. Now, it's important to say kind of upfront that we are a professional services company first and foremost. And for us, developing product wasn't something that we had a huge amount of experience of. But what we had done was identified in the market that there was this opportunity to develop a tool that would help people calculate their carbon emissions. And that was going to be really, really useful. But we weren't a product company, so we looked around to try and get help from others. And again, Benjamin, who did we speak to? What did that look like?
Yeah, so a great starting point, again, not being a startup, not being a product company, was to talk to Callahan Innovation. So that's the innovation agency. And they pointed us towards the focus framework, which is a methodology to scope out your market, understand your market segment, and formulate the value proposition. And also, a very important part of that was to identify early adopters, so organizations that were ahead of the sustainability curve that we could go and talk to see what sort of product they actually needed. And so that was the methodology that helped us to get things off the ground.
Yeah, the focus framework was eye-opening. I thought it's different from when you read books about startups. They all seem to tell a story, but what they don't do is actually provide you with practical advice. And I think this is what was brilliant about the focus framework, which was it was all about how to run a workshop, and it was Excel worksheets that you filled out, and it was worksheets that you kind of stepped through. And yes, you're right, this helped us identify this kind of this idea of early adopters. So Emma, from your perspective, how important were early adopters?
They're really fundamental because in our case for this project, our early adopters were sustainability professionals in companies. So they were really passionate, they were really enthusiastic about getting anyone who was going to sort of own it and had a new initiative. There was while they were amazing and they sort of really pushed things forward for us, I think, and they also gave us a lot of sort of market insight. But the one thing we sort of had to be careful of was that they were only kind of half of the puzzle, because say they were really passionate, but say users are likely not actually going to be as passionate. They might even be the people who'd be using this tool could be people in the company who were even climate avoiders. So we had to really be careful and realize that our early adopters were the low-hanging fruit. So yeah.
Cool, thanks. So yeah, early adopters, they helped us form a picture, but we had to be careful not to be too focused on them. So having kind of got the ideas from those early adopters, where did we go to after that? And Stacy, maybe you want to answer this question.
Yeah, well, we started off with a kind of a rapid prototyping approach. Benjamin and I were almost taken separate from the company for a few months to focus in and on this idea and rapidly try different things and see how they worked out. So we started out with the idea that we wanted a prototype that would survey people twice daily with a push notification, kind of how would you get to work? And then that would take the user directly into the application when they clicked it so they could answer the question. And our first attempt, we tried what's called a progressive web app, which is kind of a website that users can install. And we ran into a few technical issues there because it's still quite an evolving technology. And we moved from there to a React Native cross-platform app instead, which did allow us to work on iPhones and Androids and do the whole app. And so we started talking to some different organizations then to line up real-world testers.
Yeah, the fun part, I don't know if it was fun at the time, but I'll go with fun. The fun part was actually, not necessarily not knowing what we were doing, but actually using technology in different ways, trying to work out what you could do with it, what you couldn't do with it, and how that related to to our users. So, Emma, this is a great place to kind of to jump in. So we started developing this prototype, and what did the users tell us?
Well, they told us that we were wrong. So basically, our assumption that somebody would want to download the app and like fill in a travel survey was kind of not very realistic, because say maybe the sustainability managers or the advocates would be pushed to, but it was still actually a bit painful for them. But actually, like normal Joe it was too much work. So we kind of had to go back to the drawing board. And one thing I found really interesting about engaging with our sustainability managers in particular was that they were really wary of greenwashing. So we really had to walk the walk and not just like they would put us in the corner and say, so what are Abley doing, for sustainability? So in these engagement sessions, it was me and Ben a lot of the time. And it was great because he is actually like a genuine climate nerd, may I say, Ben? Yeah, so it was really good. I felt like prepared, but I definitely stayed quiet in those sessions because I'm not as knowledgeable. But yeah.
Being plainly wrong is it's not necessarily something you want to hear, but it was in our case. So Benjamin, where do we go from that? We've just spent a fair bit of time and a fair bit of money developing a prototype, which was wrong. Where next?
Yeah, so I think one of the things we did well here was to not be wedded to the ideas we had of what the product should be, and we were good at taking a step back, as Emma said, and reconsidering. We got some good advice from a startup advisor called Peter Montgomery, who we were introduced to through Callahan Innovation, and he really helped us focus on what is the bare minimum we need to make our product work and to provide those commuting emissions to the businesses at the end of the day, which was the objective. And so that helped us realize or think about what is the smallest thing we can do, minimum viable product, MVP, and how do we get there, basically.
Yeah, for us, this was kind of our second big pivot. We kind of went from how do people get to work to then measuring their emissions, and then realizing that actually it wasn't about the daily emission, it was about finding that kind of annual emission. So Emma, what happened next? What did we do?
Yeah, so we completely threw out that mobile app idea and just went back to the less glamorous like travel survey idea. Yeah, and as you were saying, Ben, the bare minimum, which is the annual commuting emissions, and working out which questions we would need to ask to get those figures. Yeah.
And Benjamin, what was it like trying to calculate those emissions? Where did we go to get that information?
Yeah, so that's something we'd done manually before. That was using an off-the-shelf survey solution and then using Excel to calculate those emissions, which was completely not scalable. And so what we then went on to do was to understand what are the bits of this process we can streamline and automate through software, and how can we make a travel survey that can scale up and spit out the right information while also protecting privacy, which we can always come back to in a bit.
Sure. So we'd spoken to our users. Again, they'd kind of pointed us in a new direction. We'd worked out how to do the kind of the carbon, the emissions calculations. Emma, you were off creating UI designs that we helped would be we hoped would be useful. So Stacy, you're kind of at the end of that chain. You're the developer building these tools. Yeah, what was that experience like? What did it mean for you?
Yeah, when we start and it's gone through a good software development process and you actually have designs to work from and build upon that have been thought through and tested with clients, it generally eases the pain of actually developing something quite a lot, because you know that it's been thought about, and it's much more simple than designing by development, where you build a piece of functionality and then test it on people and find out that they hate it. UX testing really steps in and kind of helps guide that process a lot more, makes things quicker and easier at the end of the day. Yeah.
So we went through a couple of iterations and tested them with the client, then used their feedback and reiterated. Okay, we were kind of doing this process, and I think that has led us to producing a tool that's much better. It's really focused on those users and how we expected or how they were using it. So Benjamin, we launched what was back in March. What was that like? Finally, kind of, firstly launching the thing that we've been working on for so long, and secondly, what's the reception been like?
Yeah, so it's scary when you've got your product going out into the real world and actually facing customers who are not just test users and forgiving of mistakes. The reception's been really good. We've had a lot of interest from organizations, and we have a strong pipeline of organizations who want to use the tool. And we've already rolled out some surveys on organizations. And what we find is actually most of the time when the client or the end user has a question, how do I do this? How is this taken into account by the software? It's actually stuff we've thought about already and built into the software. And I can only credit that to the fact that we stayed close to the users and that we tested repetitively, because then that means those questions surfaced early in the process and we could address them through our iterative design process. So that was really important, and it means going to market is then much smoother.
Because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, some of our clients were also our early adopters. So we're in a position where we'd already talked to them, and they knew what we were developing. And so when you actually do go to market, you've already built up a client base. So that use of early adopters and working with those clients has kind of helped us in the long run from a marketing and sales perspective as well. I am conscious of time. We have about 10 minutes left thereabouts. We wanted to throw this session out open to questions because I think for us it's really raised some questions internally about how we as an organisation act. I said from the start, professional services company, and now we're shifting a little bit more into this kind of product development space, and that in itself has had how should I put it, consequences on us as an organization. We've really had to look at who have we got in-house, how can we approach products differently. So if there are any questions, please just type them and we'll do our best to answer them. But whilst people are typing, I think it's worth coming back to that question of privacy, what you mentioned earlier, Benjamin. So it is a big issue and it's a growing issue. What were the things that we looked at to try and address that question in particular?
Yeah, and it's one that's really important to consider early on as well. So we took the approach of privacy by design, which is you build your system with privacy in mind, and you make sure you only collect information that's really required to provide the service. So you collect the minimum personal information, and then you need to have controls in place or safeguards to make sure it's protected, and also to make sure you delete the data as soon as you don't need to use it anymore. So the personal information we collect when we do those commuter surveys, it's mainly home addresses, because we need to know the distance of the commute, and people's work email addresses. And what we do is we never actually store the home address. We use it to obtain the commuting distance, and then we just delete it immediately. And that solves that problem. And then the work email address, we do need to keep for a certain while to be able to contact a respondent if they won the survey prize, for example, or also to avoid duplicate responses. So we do need to hold on to that for a little bit, but then as soon as we close the survey off, then it's deleted as well. So yeah, minimum information, and also making sure you dispose of it once you're done using it.
And certainly we've had our clients have asked us about privacy. So I think this privacy by design has been a really useful approach, because it's meant in the vast majority of cases it's a relatively easy conversation to have with the client. Yes, we followed these protocols, and therefore issues of privacy are kept to the minimum. One of the things that we did as part of this process was a penetration test to make sure that what we built was robust. Interestingly enough, none of our clients have asked us about that at all, which has been interesting. I'm not saying we wouldn't have done it anyway, but we thought it was going to be a much bigger issue than it's actually turned out to be. We have a question here. Was this sort of design-led process the one you usually use, or was it adopted because of the new focus on product? I'm going to throw that over to Emma.
I guess my thing is I am always an advocate for the design-led process. I think in our consultancy, it's still quite new. So I'm always pushing it. But I think that each project is really different. So yeah, like how much you use it or not depends on the time and who's involved and stuff. But in my world, we would always use it, always. Yeah.
And what about the other two, Benjamin or Stacy? Do you have any comments?
I would say it is an evolving space, as Emma says, and because we are professional services, it sort of depends on the project and the client's needs. So sometimes they have done a fair bit of design on their own end, and don't require additional services. But we typically find wherever we have included design as early as we can in the process, things just get better, simpler, and better for the end users.
Okay, cool. Got another question here. You've all been really positive. We try about the experience. Is there anything you do differently next time? I don't know if we've got enough time to answer that question. I think there's lots and lots of things we would do differently. But I think most of those things are because we were inexperienced at the time about what we were doing, and therefore we weren't necessarily doing it in the right way to start with. We mentioned the focus framework, and that was brilliant for providing us guidance in terms of how to step through this process. But I don't know. What about you guys? What would you have done differently? If we had this time again, I guess for me, knowing what we're building from the first instance probably would have helped. But Benjamin, Emma, Stacy, got any thoughts?
We did discover a lot on the way, which is, I suppose, when you're creating something new, there's a lot of uncertainty, and you have to embrace that. But if we could, having requirements better defined from the beginning would have helped, because then we would have saved ourselves from some back and forth between design, development, and product ownership or product management. And having better defined processes as well, which we established them as the team came together. But if from the beginning we had a clear process for how do we introduce a new feature, for example, or how do we introduce a change, and following a clear process, then that would have saved us some back and forth and having to correct things retrospectively sometimes.
Do you agree, Stacy? You were obviously coding away in the background. What was your impression?
Yeah, not really anything we'd do differently. I think, apart from what Benjamin mentioned, it's what I think we did quite well was building for an appropriate scale for it was initially a test product, and now as we look to scale bigger and get more people, more customers using it, we are going to make sure we put the right things in place each step of the way as we go.
Cool, thank you. Next question from Kirsty here. Great presentation. Well, thank you, very kind. Any future plans for CarbonWise? Benjamin, that falls in your camp.
Yeah, we have a very, very long list of improvements and new features that we'd like to see to roll out in the software. We have to prioritize them, but among the exciting ones, I would say we want to expand overseas. So the software currently is made for New Zealand workplaces and applying New Zealand emission factors, but each country has different emission factors depending on the vehicle fleet they have or the electricity mix they have. So as we expand to other countries, we need to load a lot of sustainability information into the software and make sure the software recognizes it properly. So that's an exciting one, and we want to start with Australia. And then there's a whole heap of things we could do on the employee engagement side. So currently what happens is that the employee takes the survey, gets feedback on their annual commuting emissions, and we give them some equivalents so they can see what it means. But ultimately, we can expand into more employee engagement, nudging people to change their behavior, giving them rewards, gamifying this so that they can compete with other people in the organization. For example, know how bad are their commuting emissions compared to their colleagues, for example. So there's a lot of things we could do off the back of it, and it's all going to be part of our ongoing rolling out of new versions of the software.
Cool, thank you. Well, we are just about out of time, so my thanks to Benjamin, Stacy, and Emma. You have been great, and your fires look toasty warm, which Auckland today is grey and yeah, rather wet. So actually, I think a toasty fire is a brilliant idea. Thank you for those who are listening in. If you want to know more about CarbonWise, please let us know. You can book a time with Benjamin, and he'll happily run you through it. But other than that, thank you for your time. Enjoy Tech Week, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Chris.
Cheers. Bye.